Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, my very dear students, uh, readers, listeners, peers, mentors, friends, and supporters. A very warm welcome and assalamu alaikum. We start with the holy verses of the Quran. Inna a'tayna kal kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwal abtar sadaqallahu azim. Uh, Today we are taking up the seventh lecture of the leadership series, and this is relatively a newer theory which has been coined towards the end of 20th century in the 80s, and this is based on the experience of the world in the 70s and 80s, in the last 3 decades of 20th century, that we could see the leaders very transformational in the nature that they transform their nations, they transform their organizations, and they transform the societies. We can take the examples of Chairman Mao, Chuen Lai, and then we can take the example of people like Nelson Mandela and many more leaders like them who could create a new nation from the scratches, in the sense that initially the people were not very integrated. So it's an interesting lecture today. It's more about the new developments in the leadership theories, and the title is Transformational Leadership. And within the Transformational Leadership, we will also discuss the Transactional and Charismatic Leaders. Is already discussed. We had this theory in 1980s when the approach of new leadership paradigm was coined by uh, Brahmin and other people, which was then a base for the Chrismatic and Transactional leadership. Transformational leadership is a process that changes and transforms people. So the main focus of this leadership is on transforming the people by creating and working with their emotions, their values, ethics, standards, and long term goals. It includes assessing followers' motives, satisfying their needs, and treating them as a full human beings. So, again, the emphasis of this theory is more on developing the followers. And if we look at the history of nations in which such kind of leaders, transformational leaders, could arise, they were the people who were not having common goal. There were a lot of fractions and distractions in the societies, and then they were also not having very apparent values. The value system was also very distorted in some of these nations. And finally, then we had some leaders in the world which could transform these followers and these nations into one of the best nations of the world. So the transformational leader involves an exceptional form of influence. So the more focus of this leadership style or leadership theory is creating and developing and motivating the followers to the extent that each of them become the leader. It's a process that often incorporates charismatic and visionary leadership, and that's where the concept of charisma, and we will discuss the charisma or charisma, and the visionary leader, uh, which could produce such kind of leadership. The term transformational leaders were first coined by Downton in 1973. Its emergence as an important approach to leadership began with a classic work by political sociologist J. McGregor Burns titled Leadership. So it can be credited to the two early management scientists, Downton and McGregor, who worked on this. Then the argument that what is the difference between the transformational and transactional leadership. As we look at the basic definitions of the two terms, the transformation means that you transform the people and you transform the people, the follower, to the extent that they become highly capable, highly motivated, highly enthusiastic, and highly learned people of your team, and ultimately they then create change at all levels in the society and in the organization. On the other hand, the transactional leaders are more focusing on the transactions, are the processes, the leadership process, and not only the followers but also the other systems and things like that. So transactional leadership refers to the bulk of leadership models which focus on exchange that occurs between leaders and their followers. Politicians who win votes by promising no new taxes are demonstrating transactional leadership. So they normally take the benefit of the task and situation. Similarly, managers who offer promotions to employees who surpass their goals are exhibiting transitional leadership. So, transitional leaderships are more based on the outcomes and the goals which are achieved by the people. So, its focus is not more on the development of the capacity, but more on the achievement of goals. In the classroom, teachers are being transactional when they give students a grade for work completed. The exchange dimension of transactional leadership is very common and can be observed at many levels throughout all types of the organization. So, apparently, the transactional leadership is more focused on the outcome, the timely completion of the task, and the performance. But definitely, it does not focus mainly on the development of the followers to greater extent. On the other hand, transformational leadership is the process whereby a person engages with others and creates a connection that raises the level of motivation and morality in both leaders and the followers. So, this is as a matter of fact, in a much deeper form of the transactional leadership in which you involve with the followers, and both followers and leaders are involving to create high level of motivation and morality on both sides. This type of leader is attentive to the needs and motives of followers and tries to help followers reach their fullest potential. So all the time, the focus of the transformational leaders would be more on developing the capacity and motivation of the followers. Uh, Burns points to Mahatma Gandhi as a classic example of transformational leaders. Gandhi raised the hopes and demands of millions of his people, and in this process was changed himself. And same is the case with the Muhammad Ali Jinnah. If we just look at the two leaders in the subcontinent, which definitely worked with the nation, and not only they changed and developed their nations, but at the same time also changed their own perception of leaderships. So the transformation, is a matter of fact, takes place on both sides. That it's not only the transformation of the followers, but at the same time we can see the transformation of the leader himself or herself. There is a pseudo transformational leadership also that many people in the world may claim to be uh, a transformation leader. We could see even in our country, in Pakistan, we could see that many people are claiming to be transformational leaders and creating the nation and leadership, but I think this is not the case. So, Bayes in 1988 coined the term pseudo transformational leadership, which refers to leaders who are self consumed. Pseudo means artificial, pseudo means not real, which is exploitative and power oriented. So, many people in the society we see around that they could claim to be transformational leader and developing their nations, but as a matter of fact, they were more interested in their personal development and their personal projection. And you could see a lot of leaders in Pakistan and even in the United States and other parts of the world where the leaders were more focused on their personal development and the power, acquiring the power. So, pseudo transformational leadership is considered personalized leadership, which focuses on the leader's own interests rather than the interest of others. This is again the same thing that the leaders which presume to be very transformational leaders are not interested to develop their followers and their societies. Rather, they are more interested to develop their own personality and personal consideration. You could see the leaders, a big number of leaders, which we could see in the socialist countries and also in the communist countries. That is a matter of fact, they were claiming to be a transformational leaders, but in fact, they were having a high level of corruption and high level of disintegrity and even not taking care of their followers, and they were themselves transferring a lot of money and resources from their poor nations to the rest of the world. And this is where the pseudo transformational leadership can be highly damaging to the society and to the followers. The pseudo transformational leadership is inspired leadership that is self serving, unwilling to encourage independent thought, and followers that exhibits little general caring for others. So we discussed that they are self-centered, self-inspired, and more promoting their own personal self. A pseudo-transformational leader has strong inspirational talent and appeal, but is manipulative and dominates and directs followers toward his or her own values. It is a leadership that is threatening to the welfare of the followers because it ignores the common good. And this is one of the biggest challenge for the people who presume or who assume to be transformational leaders. But in fact, if you look at the deeper, you would see that they are more interested in their personal protection. Now, the next version of this transformational leaders was the charismatic leaders. And normally the charismatic leaders, as we discussed last time, that they have some supernatural capacity, which is normally of very high talent, and the charisma, which is basically the phenomena where unusual things can happen. So the word charisma was first used to describe the special gift that certain individuals possess that gives them a capacity to do extraordinary things. So the charismatic leaders have some charisma, and this charisma is basically the capacity of doing some extraordinary things. Charismatic leaders exhibit first, they are strong role models. So the first fundamental role of the charismatic model is that they have a role model. What they preach, what they teach, they exhibit themselves, they demonstrate. The secondly, that the charismatic leader appears competent to followers. That he is having high level of competency. For example, if a leader is the head of the technology group, then all the followers would believe that he is very competent in the modern technologies. And if, for example, the leaders of a technical team is not having the capacity and competency of the modern technologies, then definitely the followers would not believe in his credibility. The third is they articulate ideological goals that move moral overtones. So their ideological goals which they set before their followers are based on moral values. And fourth, the charismatic leaders communicate high expectations for followers. So they would always place high level of expectations for the followers, and they would have the confidence that the followers would be able to achieve these goals. And fifth, the charismatic leaders arouse task relevant motives in followers that may include affiliation, power, and esteem. So the various kinds of motives which are created by the transformational leaders or charismatic leaders in the followers would be focused on affiliation to work together, empowering them for taking the decisions, and giving them high esteem and high respect in the team. Now, in this table, we can see that how the charismatic leaders' behavior have been defined. For example, their characteristics have the dominance, they have the desire to influence, they are highly self confident, they have very strong moral values. Their behavior, when they exhibit these, they are the personality characteristics, and when they exhibit these characteristics, they would demonstrate certain behaviors like they will be strong role models, they will always be very competent in their fields, they will articulate their goals in a very convincing way, they will highly communicate their expectations in a very clear way to the followers, and they would always create confidence and arouse the motives which are based on power, self esteem, and definitely affiliations with the people. Now, the effects of these transformational and charismatic leaders, particularly charismatic leadership behaviors, would be that they will be all the time believing the ideologies given by the leaders. They will find definitely the similarities on both sides. They will have unquestioning acceptance of the goals and ideals. They will have a high affection towards leader obedience, identification with leaders, emotional involvement, heightened goals, and increased confidence. And these are some of the very high level of attributes which the charismatic leaders would create to make a change in the society and create a charisma in the nation. The transformational leader we I don't want to go into the detail of this slide, but definitely the transformational leader would may go to the transactional leader, where the task is initially they would try to develop the capacity of the followers. They would try to work with them, and they would develop their capacity. And once they are highly developed and they have the motivation to work, then the transactional leadership would come, where the leader would have more focus on the outcomes and goals, and where the leader would definitely give rewards to the people who are high performers, because he or she believes that they now have the capacity and motivation to work. And maybe after some time, when the followers are highly capable and the leader has high level of trust, then it may go to the laissez-faire kind of leadership, in which the leader is having high trust, and she believes, and she has a very little, or he has a very little interference in the work of followers. But definitely it's a challenging one. The leadership factors which mm, the transformation leaders must have is the charisma, that is idealized influence. The second factor is in the transformational leader is inspirational motivation. The third is intellectual stimulation, and the fourth is individualized consideration. When we look at the transactional leadership, it's more on reward basis, and this is management by exception, both active and passive, corrective. In the laissez-faire, it's a non-transactional kind of leadership, in which the leader role is not very visible, and the things are moving in its normal way. Now we will discuss these different factors for different styles of leadership. The factor when we discuss this charisma, and the idealized influence, and it is the emotional competent, is the emotional component of the leadership. Idealized influence describe leaders who act as a strong role model for followers. Follower identify these leaders as they want very much to emulate them. These leaders usually have very high standards of moral and ethical conduct, and can be counted on the do the right things. They are deeply respected by followers, and sometimes even to the extent of spiritual leadership, who usually place a great deal of trust in them, and they provide followers with a vision and sense of mission. So, this I think is a idealized influence, is where the people would consider their leaders to be their ideals, and in terms of their beliefs, and in terms of their role model, they will always be idealized. It is measured in two components. That how would we measure that the idealized influence of the leader is low or high. The first is attributional component, that refers to attribution of the leader made by followers. That how high the followers would attribute to the leaders. And behavioral component that refers to followers' observation of leadership behavior. So the first is attribution, that how, for example, the Nelson Mandela, the first non-white president of the South Africa, Mandela was viewed as a leader with high moral standards and vision of the South Africa that resulted the monumental change in how the people of South Africa would be governed. So this is on both sides, that the leader, Nelson Mandela as a leader, has a high attributional component, and then at the same time the followers had high behavioral component, that they believed in the and trusted in. The transformation leader second component is inspirational motivation, that they would be creating high level of motivation and inspiration. The third component is the inspirational motivation, which is the factor of the leaders who communicate high expectations to followers, inspiring them through motivation to become committed to and part of the shared vision. In practice, leaders use symbols and emotional appeals to focus group members' efforts to achieve more than they would be in their own self interest. So, creating uh, a motivation level where the followers would uh, certainly uh, focus and also sacrifice their personal goals for the organizational goals would be inspirational motivation. Team spirit is enhanced by this type of leadership. An example of this factor would be sales manager who motivates members of the sales force to excel in their work through encouraging words and vigor, talks that are clearly communicate the integral role they play in the future growth of the company. So, highly inspirational motivation is created by the transformational leaders. Another is factor is the intellectual stimulation, which include the leadership that stimulates followers to be creative, innovative, and that is definitely a very high level of attribute of the leaders, in which the leaders themselves will be highly creative, and they would develop the followers innovative and creative. This type of leadership supports followers as they try new approaches and develop innovative ways of dealing. And for this, definitely they have to be highly participative leaders, supportive leaders, and they would like to encourage their followers to give the ideas and to share their solutions. It encourages the follower to think things out of their own and engage in careful problem solving. And that is what I have already explained. That this kind of leaders always encourage the followers to play their role, they empower them, and they are allowed to play their role in the decision making and problem solving. An example of this type of leadership is a plant manager who promotes workers' individual efforts to develop unique ways to solve problems that have caused slowdowns in the production. So, you may come up with a number of suggestions and recommendations from the followers when they are innovative. Individualized consideration, another very important factor, and this is really where the leaders would be highly supportive, and they create a climate in which the followers would be doing their job in a highly confident way. Leaders act as a coaches and advisors while trying to assess followers in becoming fully actualized. So they would like to develop them to the extent that they can play their best role in the organizations, and that is through individual consideration, individual focus on each and every person of the team. An example of this type of leadership is a manager who spends time treating each employee in a caring and unique way. To some employees, this leader gives strong affiliation. To others, the leader may give specific directive with a high degree of structure. Now, when we come to the transactional leadership, we already discussed that the more focus of the transactional leader is on the outcomes and reward, and they would give rewards for achieving the goals and objectives. Uh, but certainly, this may not create capacity in each and every follower. Each and every follower may not be highly motivated, and they may not be having high inspired a level of inspiration. Transactional leaders exchange things of value with followers to advance their own and their followers' agendas. Transactional leaders are influential because it is the best interest of the followers for them to do what the leaders want. Contingent reward is an exchange process between leaders and followers in which the effort by followers is exchanged for specific rewards. With this kind of leadership, the leader tries to obtain agreement from followers on what must be done and what the payoff will be for the people. So it's more focused on the outcome and definitely the trading with the followers. An example of this type of transaction is a parent who negotiates with the child about how much television a child can watch after practicing the piano. Another example often occurs in academic setting. A dean negotiates with the college professor about the number and quality of publication he or she needs to have written in order to receive tenure and promotion, and that is we normally do in the promotion and the appointment of the faculty in the tenure or in the regular system. The management by exceptions is leadership that involves corrective criticism, negative feedback, and negative reinforcement. So, management by exception takes two from active and passive. A leader using the active form of management by exception watches forward closely for mistakes or rule violation and then takes the corrective actions. For example, of active management by exception can be illustrated in the leadership of a sales supervisor who daily monitors how employees approach customers. She quickly corrects salespeople who are slow to approach customer in the prescribed manner. A leaders using the passive form intervenes only after standards have not been met or problems have arisen. So there can be two interventions from the leader who are practicing the management by exception. An example of the passive management by exception is illustrated in the leadership of supervisor who gives an employee a poor performance evaluation without ever talking with the employees about his or her prior work performance. So, both the leadership approaches by exceptions, management by exceptions can be both passive or active, but certainly both have their own merits and demerits. Now, there can be a situation where we don't have the leadership factors, and that is normally French word laissez-faire. That laissez-faire means doing nothing or status quo, in which we don't see a real leadership to come. And this sometimes also happens in the leadership. In the model, the non-leadership factor diverges further from the transactional leadership and presents behaviors that are non-transactional. The laissez-faire, the factor represents the absence of leadership, as the French phrase implies. Laissez-faire leaders take off hands, let things ride approach. This leader indicates responsibility, delays decisions, gives no feedback, and makes little effort to help followers satisfy their needs. So certainly we don't see any leadership in management, and the things are let go the way things go. There is no exchange with followers or attempt to help them grow. An example of leadership uh, leader is the president of a small manufacturing firm who calls no meeting with plant supervisor, is no long range plan for them, and act detached and makes little contact with the employees. So this is a kind of leadership where you cannot expect some very good results from the followers. So I skipped this slide in which there are many other Benes and Nans who are the promoter of this transformational leadership theory have, for example, they have clear vision, they have social architects that they create a very close relationship with the society, they have high trust in their organization, and they are always very creative deployment that they encourage the people through positive reinforcement to be creative. We discussed this in the last few. Now, how does this work? As we discussed that the world could see very great transformational leaders in the last 200, I mean, 2 decades, 2 to 3 decades. So transformation leaders set out to empower followers and nurture them in change. They attempt to raise the consciousness in individuals and get them to transcend their own self-interest for the sake of others. So this is the highest level in which the followers who sacrifice their personal needs, their personal preferences for the organizational common goals. And this is where the leadership would provide them high level of ethics in this personal role model. For example, if you expect that the people in the company can surrender some of their earning for the benefit of the organization. So certainly the team leader has also to do some sacrifice, and he has to take the lead in sacrificing some of his personal interests. And then again, he or she must be a role model. For example, Zhang, Chao, and Wu studied upper level leadership in 32 Taiwanese companies and found that transformational leader was directly related to organizational innovations. That the organization where you have more innovative environment where the creativity, innovation is high, then definitely the transformational leader would be more visible. Transformational leadership created a culture in which employees felt empowered and encouraged to freely discuss and try new things. So this is certainly a level of leadership where the people would come up with the innovative solutions to the problems. It is common for transformational leaders to create a vision. Yes, they will have a very clear vision before all the team followers. The vision emerges from the collective interest of various individuals and units in an organization. So it should not only serve one component or one person or one group of persons, rather it should serve the common goals of the organization. And finally, the requires that leaders become social architects. Right? They have the capacity to develop a very strong relationship with the various stakeholders, both internal and external, and have a high level of values and norms. Transformational leaders encourage other and celebrate their accomplishments. In the end, transformational leaders result in people feeling better about themselves and their contributions. And this is really very important where the team members believe that they are very important to the achievement of common goals and where the organization goals are, are thought to be supreme to the individual goals. Now, this has been widely researched from many different perspectives. For example, uh, a lot of CEOs have studied and organizations have been studied from the transformational perspective. Secondly, it's an intuitive appeal. Certainly, when the transformation perspective describes that the leader, by becoming a role model, can influence, create the high inspirational influence and this is what is the popular notion of the leadership. Third, transformational leadership treats leadership as a process that occurs between followers and leaders. So this is where a strong affiliation and a strong relationship between the followers and the leader is highly advocated. Again, it provides a broader view of leadership that augment other leadership models. Many leadership models focus primarily on how leaders exchange reward for the transaction for the achieved goals. Fifth, transformational leadership places a strong emphasis on follower needs, values, and morals, and this is what the Byrne also suggested. And finally, there is substantial evidence that transformational leadership is an effective form of leadership. So there is a good number of research and empirical evidence in the last 30 years now that we could see, almost 50 years now, we could see some high degree of research to see that this has been a very. But again, there's, as usual, a list of criticism also. For example, it lacks the conceptual clarity, though there is a transformational power and a charismatic power, but we cannot explain this more in the form of. So it's highly subjective, and we don't get a very quantifiable model to see that how the charisma, the transformation brings the change. The second is that it revolves around transformational leadership is measured. Uh, the third is the transformational leadership treats leadership as a personality trait. So this, if you just look at the basic theme and the theory of the transformational leadership, it is most revolving around the personality of the transformational leader and his values, and this is something which makes the leader more important in this leadership process. Fifth criticism is that transformational leadership is elitist, and anti-democratic, suffer from heroic leadership bias. This is another very important criticism, that you make the leader such an elite and such, I mean, at a high level of elitism, that he becomes more like a hero, and the people have very little power to talk to him or to give their recommendation. Even sometimes the criticism may not be allowed by this kind of leaders, because the way they become highly elitist in the form of leadership styles. Final criticism is that it has the potential to be abused. Certainly, we could see that in the pseudo-transformational leadership cases, for example, in North Korea, there are a couple of other countries in which we can see that the leaders have assumed the pseudo-transformational leadership, and they are abusing the basic transformational powers. But despite of all these shortcomings, we see that it can be applied widely about leadership, that inspiration, innovation, and individual concern. Transformational leader requires that leaders be aware of how their own behavior relates to the needs of their followers and the changing dynamics with the organization. Transformational leadership can be taught to people at all levels in an organization, and that is positively affect the performance. So you can make the transformational leaders at art level and teach them how can they transform their followers. One particular aspect of transformational leadership is that it has been given special emphasis in training programs in the process of building a vision, and this has been a very commonly used leadership training programs. The desire to provide effective training in how to be more successful in demonstrating transactional and transformational leadership resulted in the development of a guide by Sosek and Jung. And overall, transformational leadership provides leadership information about the full range of their behavior, from non-transactional to transactional to transformational. So from laissez-faire, and then you come to the reward-based leadership, and finally, then you come to the transformational. There was a company in which the president was having a high vision, but unfortunately, he failed to bring the transformation in the followers, and ultimately the company could not take up. So this is a company HDE in which the main failure was poor transformational leadership. This is the multi-factor leadership questionnaire, which is based on the transformational transactional leader, and you can then check your own capacity in terms of. These are a couple of which I have downloaded from the. And finally, there's an assignment. Those of who want to attempt this assignment, they are welcome. They may go through these papers and see that how the transformational leadership has been studied by various researchers. So there are some research papers. So kindly go to these research papers. The links have been given, and you can just find the research paper.